Give me a countdown of 10.
Are y'all there?
I can't actually
Yep.
do that, Pat. We're ready to go.
Live?
Oh, yeah.
And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and, of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us. This video feed is now available on Periscope via Twitter, on the Coalition's Radio YouTube page, the link of which is on coalitionradio.us, as well as coalitionradionetwork.com, and, of course, our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. The purpose of this programming over the last week or so is to give folks who are running for the presidency of the United States via a run for the Libertarian ticket an opportunity in a long-form conversation to get into a detailed analysis of what their stands are on a variety of issues of the day. This is not a debate format, and my job is really not to question or look for gotchas. It's really to be an exploratory conversation where folks can really develop what their thought process is. The Coalition has always had, in its 7 years of programming, a very strict approach to independent candidates. We celebrate independent candidates, obviously. We celebrate libertarians, Greens, whoever. Of course, we celebrate libertarians a little bit more. But unlike, say, the mainstream media, which is obsessed with handicapping elections, it is the belief of the Coalition that we simply are not interested in your fundraising. We're not interested in your polling. We're not interested in where you stand vis-a-vis other candidates, whether it be in your respective party or the body politic at large. We don't want to know if you're going to win. We simply want to know why you should. And that has been our mantra, really, since day one. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce a candidate tonight who I think has taken a couple of very intriguing positions on the issues of the day, from the debt, the war on drugs, the debt, which seems to explode every moment. I think we have, if super producer Joel is listening to me, I think we have to get one of those debt clocks in the back of us. Just play that all day long. Kind of like those fireplaces you used to watch on Christmas Day. Yeah. Of course, at that point in time, our viewers would be thrown into some sort of, total collapse with the, if you will, unimaginable increase just in the past few days. Oh, by the way, good news, folks. The federal government has decided to spend another $500 billion today of money that is freshly printed. Some would say the scent of spring is the first scent of newly mowed lawn. In the year 2020, the true scent of spring is the scent of newly printed currency. Phil Gray, for the very first time, welcome to the Coalition.
Thank you, Pat. I'm so happy to be here.
No, and we appreciate you taking time from obviously a hectic schedule. Our hats are always off to candidates everywhere, particularly of the libertarian ilk. Folks need to understand, particularly in times like these, the tremendous personal sacrifice that's involved in running from anything from town council on up to the presidency of the United States as a third-party candidate. The challenges are immense. The personal commitments are great. The personal sacrifices are even greater. Let's spend a little bit of time. We've got time tonight. We can take this as late as we want. Tell us a little bit about Phil Gray, the backstory. Give us a little bit of notes about your upbringing, your career, and we always ask this for every candidate. What was that libertarian moment when the light bulb, in the cartoons, went up above your head, and you said, "Oh, you know what? I am a libertarian." Tell us about Phil Gray.
I was a Republican until 92. I left the Republican Party left me at the 92 Texas convention. I was a delegate. Could not stand their invasion into personal space, and I was independent for a long time. Did not really have a home, was uncomfortable, The Democrats wanted me to run in 2012 on the Democratic ticket for Congress, but I'm not a Democrat. I discovered the LP in 15 and said, this is my home.
What was it that attracted you? What were you drawn to by the Libertarian Party?
The Libertarians believe in freedom, liberty for all. They believe in fiscal responsibility at the government level. They believe in personal responsibility. And they believe in leaving people alone. The old parties can't do that. It's just not in their makeup.
Have you run for elected office before as a Libertarian?
Yes, I did. I ran in 16 for Congress. In 18, I ran for the U.S. Senate, and I did not get the nomination. And Texas law requires that you only run for one position, so I was reduced to run for a write-in. And I ran for a write-in candidacy for Congress in 18 also as an independent. I have been a libertarian all along, but in Texas, they don't allow parties.
So again, folks essentially are disenfranchised from really being able to explore their political choices in states across the nation who've decided that they will hand over structural control of the election process, if you will, to the duopoly. In a sense, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? You know, they get to crowd out the competition. It is in fact a monopoly, which allegedly both parties oppose. We are in troubled times here. We are at a time when our people, individuals look for leaders in ways they've never done. The leadership on both sides have failed us, Phil Gray. What's it going to take for the duopoly to ease off the reins and allow for individual participation, all voters to make their own choices in our electoral system?
We're going to have to beat them. They will not cede their power without our effort. They won't change the rules for us. We have to beat them. The Electoral College gives us the opportunity. I challenge all of our candidates to pick a state to get electoral votes. As little as 36 electoral votes will do it.
What you're mentioning there, then, of course, is a policy where, or say an approach where all folks would be driven to, if you will, a contested election in Congress, then, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed. I have been in every office in Congress in the last 9 months, both House and Senate, both sides of the aisle. I've been asking them to reform immigration. My goal is to allow I would open borders if I could, but we cannot. So my goal is to allow the immigrant the option to pay for entry if he chooses, to pay for stay if he chooses. Every payment goes to the national debt. Every payment becomes available to loan to others. We can replace this entire $2 trillion with loans to those who need them. And their repayment of those loans will reduce the national debt.
That brings us really to your platform. You've got literally, and first of all, kudos to you because it's well developed. It's interesting. It's unlike anything I've seen. But at the same time, you've developed it literally by issue by issue by issue. So let's talk about paying the national debt. On your website, you're focusing on a $23 trillion debt. I believe that's the updated numbers before today. And, of course, one needs almost a ticker tape to follow the national debt at this point. Like as I mentioned earlier in the run-up to the show, I think we just added another $500 billion. But, after a couple billion here, a couple $100 billion there, turns out it adds up to real money, doesn't it, Phil? Let's talk then about easing the path of immigrants. Explode that a little bit. You've got to give us an analogy or an example of what you see as a simultaneously a move towards immigration reform and paying the national debt. Just kind of blow that up a little. Give us a real life example.
Okay, we have something like 11 million undocumented workers. Well, we did have prior to the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. Had 11 million undocumented workers hiding in the shadows, afraid to come out, hiding from Donald. Allow them to simply file a tax return and include an additional 10% of their income in payment to our national debt. Their 1040 becomes their green card. When questioned by the authorities, they hold it up, they say, I paid, I stay. The authorities say, fine. For DACA, they are in a nebulous situation. They're dependent on Donald's whim at this point. If they want to guarantee their safety and their continued residency in our country, let them file that tax return. Let them voluntarily pay that 10%. Nobody's forcing them to, but I believe that many will, just so they don't have to worry. Peace of mind is very valuable.
It's interesting you bring up DACA. And, of course, we're talking about a program aimed primarily at young people who were born here in the United States were born to parents who are here in the United States, came here very often at a very, very young age, and, ultimately woke up, many of them, to the realization that they weren't, quote-unquote, legitimate American citizens until many of them were actually filed for student loans, ironically. That was often when they found out. We seem to have forgotten those folks. They were the poster children, if you will, literally, for the left and right of center participants in the duopoly who extorted, and by the way, fellas, as the show's other mantra is that we are outrage porn free. And they were used as a tool to generate outrage porn literally for on and off for a couple of years. What does it say to you that all of a sudden, because other issues have come up in the whack-a-mole of everyday American politics, that suddenly we've forgotten the DACA's children? Was it not a precedent issue? Do you think that was an issue where folks were manipulating emotions on both sides?
DACA under Obama has status. That status must be taken away. Donald has promised he will do that, but the timing is up in the air. I want to give them status so that Donald can't, so that the powers that be leave them alone. Mm-hmm. Let them get on with their lives.
In terms of their status, though, and this is the term of all, the status of all folks. Folks particularly right around the beginning of the 20th century, there was a tremendous surge of immigration from Western Europe. And folks like to equate that with having been legal, possibly because for many folks here in the United States now, it was their grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, that somehow it was legal. For folks entering the country for the first time, are you saying they should pay the 10% then, or are you willing to extend to them, expand the worker visa program with the potential that they would then pay taxes?
For those seeking entry from outside, I ask that they pay a sum. That sum is set by Congress. I'm proposing $3,000. For expedited entry, then they can come on in, then they can file a tax return and renew that visa that they came in on. And their 1040 again becomes their green card.
Interesting. What was not going to question your motivation, because I believe your motivations are very good. I've gone through your website. But what was the thought process? I mean, no one's really approaching it, if you will. Folks who are opponents will call it pay to play. Folks who will support it, if you will see to the practical application of it. Folks who believe in open borders, as I do personally, by the way, might see it as, well, a payment to the government, which transcends, or I should say replaces, what their natural right of free passage is. I mean, from a libertarian's perspective, if you have free passage, as I believe you do, as long as you don't aggress, then why pay a government for entry like this? What's your thoughts? Or is it simply a practical look at the deficit?
I have worked with immigrants my entire working life. I have rented to immigrants as a landlord. My first job was a concrete finisher, and the entire crew was immigrants. They're hardworking, decent people. They deserve a right to be here. If I could let them be here, if I could wave a wand and let them be here without payment, I would gladly do so. I would like to see European-style borders on our borders. This is my personal preference. I can't pass that through Congress. It will be dead on arrival in the Senate if I manage to get it through the House. I want to help the people. I don't want to make a grandstand. No, I don't want to wave a flag, hey, look at me. I came up with something. I want to help them.
This idea of, if you will, of a user fee supporting a variety of institutions, or generated by a variety of institutions, to reduce the deficit, it sort of plays out through your entire campaign. Talk about your thoughts on national parks. I found that particularly fascinating. Kind of develop that. Give us the elevator pitch on how you feel about national parks and national lands, the forestry people.
I differentiate between the national park system and the national lands, the BLM land. The BLM land, the federal government owns a great deal, and that came about through a variety of reasons. The land itself is of limited value, but it has assets in amongst it. Mines, timber. If we allow the mines and the timber to be sold off, we will be left holding the bag on the rest of it. The states can't take it because they can't administer it either. If we can make it where those lands will pay for themselves, so that we can, without going deeper in debt, transfer them to private ownership, to leases, to the states, we can resolve the issue.
So you believe that the primary revenue generation should be directed toward the states, or first off to pay off the deficit?
No, I'm sorry, Pat. I will not use those monies from the BLM land to pay to the deficit.
Okay.
We're at break even. Um, my goal is simply to get us out of the land business, but get us out of the land business by free enterprise. Allow hemp producers, with the state's blessing, perhaps hemp could be a crop that would help resolve the economic issues. Grazing will not. There's just not that much money in grazing. We've got to somehow pay for all the acreage. We've got to pay for administering all the acreage, handling the roads, police protection, all of the things that must be done, or pass it to the states. But if we pass it to the states, we've got to have revenue enough that the states can handle it. The states are not allowed to have deficits.
You should visit Rhode Island someday. That we are the deficit state. So
We are, sir.
it's there are financial tragedies in the making as well as the obvious human ones, and I feel as if we're just about to reach that point very soon. From your perspective, when you look at this enormous deficit, talk to folks about what you feel the implications are in the short term. I personally fear for people on a physical basis in the short term. I wonder if we've reached that point of near societal collapse in terms of our finances in the long point. How close are we, if we don't address this deficit, how close are we to that point of collapse?
I do not believe we are approaching a collapse. We will approach a collapse when we can no longer sell our bonds to willing buyers. Right now, we're able to sell those bonds for almost nothing. Now, I think the interest rate we're paying is down around 0.25%. But people, because they believe that America failed. The moment that changes, the moment somebody gets into power, like Ted Cruz,
Yep. And we lost him. We've lost Phil Gray. Folks, if you're just joining us, I'm wondering if we occasionally run into a situation where we drop signals, I believe personally, because of the overwhelming load on the internet, particularly at certain times of the night. I've been invited to at least 4 watch parties in the last few minutes just by people who are looking at different things. Phil, do we have you back?
I am here.
All right, beautiful. All right, so we were talking about, and you brought up an important point. You know, right now, America, with its bonds, represents that flight to safety, if you will, that rock, the rock of Gibraltar, if you will, financially. You know, there are 2 issues, and to your point, there is a triggering point where America will no longer represent that. So I guess a better question, the one that I should have asked you, was how close are we to that? From your perception as someone who I would imagine spends a great deal of time watching the markets and watching and analyzing ongoing foreign affairs.
I don't believe that we are that close. I believe that the bond buyers will continue as long as they have money to invest. They will have money to invest as long as Main Street has money to pay them.
Mm-hmm.
When we, as Americans, the mighty middle, I call them, have money in our pockets, we buy things. That grows our economy. That grows that covers our debt. That also pays to the wealthy who sell us much of what we have. The wealthy will then be able to buy the bonds. They will need to buy those bonds for the investment. They've got to have a parking place.
The issue, though, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate a little bit while you're doing the dance.
Of course.
The issue, of course, is that a significant part of Main Street in America has been shut down. And when you look at states like Rhode Island, which have been among the more aggressive players, if you will, in shutting them down, in shutting them there's no apparent time frame for them to, and as a libertarian, this next line makes me ill, to open up the economy, as if somehow the state has the authority morally, fiscally, financially, to quote unquote decide when it's time to open the doors. I find that very concept to be repulsive. So with that in mind, Main Street right now is troubled. Main Street is in deep trouble. You know, estimates abound in this part of New England, and we're just one tiny corner of the country, as important as we think we are to the world. But you're potentially talking about 50, 60% of the economy may not come back. When I say the economy, I'm talking about small businesses, restaurants in particular, have been crippled. Now, you know, again, I believe where there are challenges and there is failure, there is opportunity. That's the cleansing notion of the free market. But again, simultaneously, we're hobbled with this debt. And I worry about a country which has now decided that there is no moral hazard to printing $2 or $3 million. If the wrong person, and I'm not sure if there's a right person in the duopoly, but if one individual party is brought to power, particularly if they capture the House, they can legitimately point to people that if you can print $2 trillion worth of money overnight for the business sector, why can't you do it for free tuition? Why can't you do it for Medicare for all? And at that point in time, that crushing blow, more weight is put on our currency, or it continues to crumble the value of the currency. I'm not sure. So do you think that there is the curve, if you will, to that type of collapse is that much off that we can accept that much more trauma, if you will, to our economy?
I would like to talk with you a moment about what we can do.
Okay.
We are in dire straits, but if we just simply begin to pay down the national debt, just by that simple act, we make money available to loan. We could replace this entire stimulus bill, this entire stimulus package, with loans from the debt fund that are not taxpayer money. And we can repay, as those loans are repaid, we can reduce the national debt, and those dollars become available to loan in turn.
Mm-hmm.
The debt is a danger, but the debt is also an opportunity if we will grasp it.
Okay. Other issues. Let's talk about the war on drugs. I think we all agree, as all libertarians, that the war on drugs is an absolute failure. On not only a financial level, but a moral failure as well, a logistical failure, just a complete and utter crushing failure. What is your response, if you will, to folks who would continue the war on drugs? Mr. Biden, by the way, is one of the architects of the war on drugs, and he, astonishingly enough, is looking at particularly elevating a young woman from California who was the chief enforcer of the war on drugs. What say you?
Decriminalize all of it. Licensed vendors, we have got to give Congress the opportunity to protect themselves. In this day and time of ODs and adulterated poisonings, We have got to have quality control that is singularly lacking in our current system.
Mm-hmm.
Decriminalize the use of all drugs at the federal level. Licensed vendors, leave licensing to the states. Let the states decide what level of quality and dosage control is necessary to protect themselves.
There are many libertarians who will argue that the free market will be a much more effective once it's decriminalized or legalized, depending on your interpretation. I mean, wouldn't you prefer pure legalization? Why would you make the distinction between decriminalization and legalization? I'm curious.
Decriminalization of use.
Okay.
I want the illegal trafficker, the trafficker who's making meth in the back seat of a car out of battery acid. Oh, come on now. I'm not going to mandate, but to pass anything of this nature through Congress, we must offer Congress cover. They have got to have the opportunity to be able to say, we are doing something about adulterated poisonings. We are doing something about the fentanyl. You talk about the free market. The free market puts fentanyl in heroin. It kills people.
I think that, okay, let me debate that with you for a second.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. The presence of fentanyl on the streets right now across America is a landmine, literally, for every drug user. If you step on the wrong drug, you step on the wrong supplier, it will kill you. You know, one of the understated side effects of mass incarceration of drug users is that they are often recidivists. When they are left out into the public, a significant percentage of them become users again in the absence of treatment, a treatment which is discouraged, of course, by the criminalization to begin with. So you have this incredibly vicious circle. Those folks are having been out and off of drugs for any period of time, typically through, if you're of a certain generation, going what we used to say is cold turkey, which is a particularly brutal treatment of human beings. So they go into the market, and of course, their bodies are incapable of absorbing drugs at a high level, and virtually no one can withstand the effects of fentanyl. But it's my belief. You see, I'm nervous about licensing because we have a situation here in Rhode Island where medical cannabis is licensed, and that has worked to serve as an additional conduit of taxation and an additional, if you will, obstacle, a barrier to entry into the market. In the legal cannabis market, even in the medical cannabis market, there exist third-party companies who will certify to the quality of that cannabis, and it's a at profit with organizations that are well documented. Wouldn't it be better just, and I agree with you that we need to end the war on drugs. I think we both agree on that. But as an antidote, won't getting the federal government into the certification business introduce additional barriers to entry and additional costs and additional, well, I've never seen the government particularly good at regulating anything. Won't free market companies who can provide certification be a much, driven in fact by the profit margin, being hired by manufacturers, if you will, of newly decriminalized drugs in your world? Isn't that a better solution? Or do you think the government is best suited to provide that type of analysis?
My goal is to get us entirely out, get the federal government entirely out of drugs, shut down the DEA. Under my proposal, we won't need it anymore.
Mm-hmm. And is this
leaving it up to the states?
Mm-hmm. I see a lot of what you're proposing as a reaction to an incalcitrant Congress. Congress seems willing and unwilling to do anything practical. So I get your point. Is that your main concern? The fact that unless there's some carrot with the stick, that Congress will simply sit on it like they seem to sit on everything?
the only way Congress is going to do anything with drugs is if they can look good to the voters. I believe that if they address the adulterative poisonings, the ODs, I believe we can get somewhere, particularly with the marijuana legalization that is already sweeping across the country. However, my fear is if we strip out marijuana and legalize marijuana, then the war on drugs will continue. There will not be that critical mass of voters demanding an end to the war on drugs if marijuana is separated and legal.
I absolutely agree. I think you're 100% on that point. If you will, the segregation of marijuana to somehow being, because it's a quote unquote socially acceptable narcotic, it will allow government, to your point, cover to release it, but at the same time maintaining the rest of the infrastructure, if you will, that puts people in cages for, what they do to their own bodies, and will remove any exigency or any urgency is probably a better word to doing anything. They'll simply then we'll still continue to enact and reenact the movie The French Connection on the streets of the cities of America, and with all the attendant virtues. And I use that. Okay, I get that completely. The minute one of the other mantras of the coalition, and we've got several, because we're libertarians, so we think of them. We think of these things all the time. Is that incrementalism is the devil. Incrementalism in approaching any public policy issue allows for the mission creep and the cancerous growth of government to just continue to restore itself back to its position as primary in just about every relationship we've got in America: physical, financial, product, experiential. The only way to approach a problem in America is to literally pull the tooth, is to get government out of it as much as possible. Folks, if you're just joining us, Phil Gray is a candidate for the presidency of the United States. He's competing for the Libertarian nomination. He's joined us tonight, and we certainly appreciate it, an opportunity to chat with him. The point of this is for an hour or so to have a conversation about the issues. And in doing so, eliminate a lot of the nonsense and the hype and the outrage porn that conventional media seems to believe should be the bread and butter of our American political discourse. To which, of course, we say at the Coalition, balderdash on that. So we appreciate you taking the time to do this, Phil. There are candidates in the mainstream parties, if you will, their terms, not ours, that are afraid of extended conversations because you can only fake it for about 20 minutes. And then, ruh-roh, you got to answer a question. Obviously, one of the thorniest issues that we face... I'm sorry, go ahead, buddy.
I said, give me that opportunity.
Absolutely. So I'm going to open up the floor to you then. National defense.
I'm sorry.
Oh, what's that, bud? You still with us?
Pat, I'm sorry, you broke up.
Okay. So let's talk about national defense then, because I believe there are, in my opinion, and I'm going to open up the floor to you for a few minutes, so feel free to run with it. The two biggest challenges we face as a country, besides obviously COVID-19, is in fact, A, the war on drugs, because there are so many attendant ills to it that come out of it. We talked about that a little bit. And B, of course, our insatiable need to build a standing army, which we then have an insatiable need to, if you will, shuttle around the world, engage in nation building and all others. There's some nonsense. So I'm going to open up the floor to you. Talk to me about our military budget, the national defense, and what you think needs to be done.
My first move in Congress, first day, I will ask Congress to rewrite the War Powers Act so that our administration, our presidents don't get us into wars. I believe that prosperity of everyone, universal prosperity, is necessary to peace. I believe we can have peace. I believe we can have peace in the Mideast. I believe we can have peace with Russia. I believe we can have peace with China. If we just understand where they are coming from. Russia fears attack from the West. Their 3 invasions in our history, in the U.S. history, have come from the West. All 3 of them, they stopped by burning their own fields, wiping out their own villages, and stretching the enemy supply lines so that they couldn't continue. Since World War II, they have had buffer zones or double buffer zones. Those are no longer there. We now have allies, American allies, NATO allies on Russia's borders, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. We are in Ukraine, or they are in Ukraine, and they fear immensely Ukraine going west. Make them an offer, make them a promise. We will work with Russia to allow those buffer states to be completely independent, with the entire, with free trade, with the entire Comic-Con. We can have a free trade alliance, and Russia no longer needs all those divisions. And one day, our allies in NATO will no longer need us, and we can bring those troops home. If we promise Russia that we will immediately actions the moment their troops cross the Don going east out of Ukraine, I believe they'll pull out.
Do you think that American foreign policy, particularly under the current administration, and even to a degree the Obama administration, whose, if you will, incursions into Eastern Europe diplomatically incited a lot of this, do you think they really understand, and I say this term gently, it's not meant to be an insult, but it's really kind of a reflection on the Russian national soul, as you just alluded to. Do you think they understand Russian paranoia? Do you think they get it?
No. No, they do not.
How is that possible in a nation where we dedicate so much effort to a State Department and to all of these efforts? Is it just neocons gone wild? Is it just sort of a naivete on the behalf of progressive Democrats? Because both sides have been equally culpable in instigating Russia into reactions. And if you look at the history of World War II, which is where we should be studying all the time, very often our blockades, our feints left and right have often created misinterpretations of our ultimate desires, or maybe real interpretations. How is that possible in a government which spends so much money and so much soul, if you will, studying these issues?
The difficulty is that Russia will push back. They will, since the czars, they have pushed west. They have wanted that buffer state. Since Charles II and Napoleon, they wanted a buffer state. I just simply propose to give them one that they don't have to take with the force of arms. Give them a buffer state that is independent of them and of us, a demilitarized zone of sorts that is, for the first time in history, a demilitarized zone that is self-sufficient, that can be the linchpin for peace with East and with West, and will become incredibly wealthy in the process. It's not been tried. I think it's time we try it.
Now, similar lessons can be extrapolated with other parts of the world. Constructive engagement has been
Yes, sir.
sort of the bogeyman, if you will, of our relationships from nations from South Africa to China. What are your thoughts on a foreign policy level of constructive engagement?
I want to prosperity universally. Donald's first mistake when he came into office was to do away with the TPP, which completely isolated China. That he could have used the TPP as leverage to settle the patent issues, the copyright, the intellectual property issues, which is his initial goal in all of these tariffs. And he has failed miserably. And he threw it away. It was there in his hands. We can work with China. China simply wants enough supplies to make the goods they need, enough trade to earn the revenue they need, the hard currency, and they need us. They're our number one importer of soybeans, beef, pork, are desperate to sell their crops. They lost a good bit of crop in the floods because they were sitting in granaries because of Donald's policies.
That's fascinating because if you listen to that sort of unique brand of Trump populism, and I'm trying to be kind here, I think you can tell, not a fan. They have, let's just say, convinced themselves to believe that we have beaten China. Have we beaten China?
Nobody beats China. What we did to China was we forced them to accept a trade deal that they can't possibly live up to. They cannot buy that much of our product. It's foolish. We also antagonize them with our efforts. And they have the world's largest army. And they're building a very strong Navy. Our children will not appreciate it if we continue on this path. Can I tell you what I'd like to do for China?
Absolutely.
China needs oil. They've been buying Iranian oil at a discount because of our sanctions, because they're the only ones who will. Then they go to the South China Sea and seek that oil. And their 9-dash line claims the entire South China Sea just so they can have all of the oil. They've got endless supply of oil just to their north. But the Russians are unable to fully develop the Siberian fields. They need American technology, but we've got sanctions against Russia. Get those sanctions out of the way. Once Russia pulls out of Ukraine, Americans can help them develop those fields and perhaps help them to build a pipeline to China so that China can have all of the oil they need.
Do you think folks get it yet that a antagonistic relationship that is purely linear, A plus B must equal C, instead of, shall we say, a productive environment where free market conditions help to eliminate border tension, and by engaging in prosperity and creating a middle class and allowing prosperity to flow down into the working classes of any society, is the more optimal way to approach foreign policy? Or does there always have to be a winner? Does there always have to be a bogeyman? What do you think it'll take? Because I happen to agree with you. Ultimately, if you look across our history, too many times embargoes, tariffs, blockades have led to war. To me, the ultimate answer to everything is the free market. When someone's a customer, you're less likely to want to, if you will, bomb them back into the Stone Age. It's an astonishingly simple concept. What's it going to take to get that level of understanding at some point to the American voter?
I think the American voter is already there. If you notice, 50% did not vote in the last election. Mm-hmm. They're sick and tired. They're disillusioned. They're disgusted. They vote for the lesser of evils or don't vote. Reach them with this message of universal prosperity, universal peace. We can win this election. This is my goal. You talked a moment ago about nobody's going to bomb a customer into the Stone Age. I put it slightly different. No one in history has ever warred on a freely trading partner. If we will pay our national debt, if we will reduce it and make funds available to loan, we can loan it to entrepreneurs in third world countries. We can loan it to our own people, of course. We can loan it to people in China who want to build a factory that the Politburo will allow. We can end communism with loans. Loan it to countries. These are not loans that the taxpayer supplies. These are loans that come from paying down our debt. That fund will be in the trillions as we pay down the debt. It will shore up Social Security, it'll shore up Medicare, and it'll keep on pumping out loans. Make those loans available worldwide for infrastructure, for health care. Let them pay us back at reasonable terms instead of paying China at usurious terms. China's Belt and Road Initiative that they are in an effort to protect their own supply lines and their own customer base. But they're hard-handed. They take things. They own the port of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia.
So effectively,
because of a loan default.
Right. So effectively replace, if you will, foreign aid in a real sense with foreign aid in the form of loans. Thus,
exactly.
Just creating a partnership as opposed to an occupation on a trade basis. Am I understanding it properly?
Exactly.
Interesting.
You are indeed, sir, except and I'd like to go a little bit further.
Go right ahead.
If I may.
Absolutely.
Not only will we replace foreign aid, we will replace farm aid. We will replace disaster relief. We will replace infrastructure bills that Congress has not yet filed. We will replace road bills for our crumbling highways and bridges, all with loans that come from the debt, that don't come from the taxpayer.
Interesting. What was the process that how you arrived at this idea? I'm always curious as to the not only just the idea itself, but the thought process, the germination, if you will, the construct that you were operating under when you decided to go in this direction.
While completing my master's degree way back in '90, I developed a plan with my economics professor to priority graduate way, and I was going with it. And Ross, Pickens came up with transportation. But T. Pickens thought small. He thought about a government subsidy to help fleets, to help corporations. I took it a step further. I reached out to T. Boone Pickens, and I suggested to him, make natural gas a transportation fuel for homeowners. Get behind a program so that homeowners can make their own fuel for as little as 80 cents a gallon. Do you think people would like 80-cent a gallon fuel? Pat?
Yes, and get it in a way that doesn't involve essentially a global collapse. Yes, it would be helpful without the attendant ancillary issues, if you will. So yeah, I agree. Interesting.
So my proposal is simple. Make natural gas available. Natural gas is already available to 65 million homeowners. Give them the choice of compressing their own fuel and converting their existing, and loan them the money to do it. That 80 cents a gallon includes a quarter that pays the national debt. Turn that money around, loan it out, and how many jobs do we create? 65 million homes, 100 million cars. How many compressors do we need? How many kits? How many people to install them? Can we say a bunch?
Yeah, a bunch is. I certainly like the term of a bunch. A bunch is certainly a much more noble term after actively contemplating if you will, a quadrillion. A quadrillion, I believe, succeeds trillion, correct? As we approach
Yes,
as we begin to actually grasp the concept of a quadrillion. No, again, fascinating stuff. It's original thought. There is a surfeit of original thought out in the world today. That's for sure. Now, of course, then we get, of course, to healthcare. Well, let me jump back a second, if you will. A question that I've asked a number of the candidates this past week, and I think you've already touched on a little bit, but let's get to a very practical application. The President of the United States last week, in what now has appeared to be merely another facile move of his, the word impotent as opposed to omnipotent comes to mind, attempted to broker a relationship between Saudi Arabia and the Russians with regard to oil output, which, of course, he crowed about what a great deal it was for everybody and how it was going to stabilize markets. Yeah, okay. but to the important point here, the interference, if you will, of a sitting American president in negotiating, if you will, I won't call it a trade agreement, but that type of market interference, I believe, at the expense ultimately of the American taxpayer. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know what the president can do to live up to that. He promised that we would reduce our production, our exports, and he never said how he's going to do that. I don't know. By government fiat? He has already told the oil producers that they can drill for less royalty on national lands going direction. Beyond that, I don't know what he's got in mind. I don't know how he can live up to that promise. And it's an empty promise anyway. We have an oil glut, and our producers are going to reduce their output.
Well, it brings up a question of central planning in and of itself. There is this false construct out there that I believe that Americans have been deluded that somehow the Chinese, who are a lower cost producer, or I should say East Asia is a lower cost producer of a variety of consumer items, and somehow that is a problem. What's never discussed or very often ignored is the benefit to the American consumer of these lower cost products. There just doesn't seem to be any real analysis, if you will, of the back and forth impact, the nature of a free market in and of itself. And that continues to be exhibited with how politicians prey on voters' emotions. It's the best and lowest. There are places in the market for the very best of a product, which might exist. It might, if you will, exhibit a toll on the buyer by a higher price or for perceived increase in quality. There's a place in the market for lower cost items, and their worth is decided solely by the willingness of the greater market to pay for them. But generally speaking, market efficiencies are created where there is a drive to produce quality products at lower costs. And if the American economy is incapable of delivering that, any attempt to do this, to alter the economy or interfere with it, is simply a market manipulation that has the potential to have tragic implications. Why? First of all, do you agree with that? And B, why do you think that's so difficult for folks to understand? Did we lose Phil?
I believe
Okay.
in the wisdom of the American people. I believe that they understand this very clearly, but they don't have a representative government anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The government is controlled by the parties are controlled by their fringes, and everybody's fighting with everybody. I believe that the solution is to raise wages worldwide, not lower ours, not make a minimum wage increase for us, but to allow prosperity to bloom worldwide. Let the Chinese people buy American products because they're superior. Let them have the money to be able to do that they can earn at home. And the same for Nicaraguans, the same for everyone.
But ultimately, isn't an increase in quality through competition while simultaneously driving down prices through competition, isn't that ultimately work as a increase in income, if you will, for anyone in that marketplace? Doesn't that have the same effect?
Sure. Yeah.
See, we get it. Libertarians get it. I don't know. Sometimes I think, with this lockdown, we should have had, not only just a forced lockdown, but a forced economics intervention for most of the country. And of course, that acts as a natural segue into possibly the most difficult issue of all, which is healthcare. Give us your perspective on our system as it stands and where you think it should go.
Our system as it stands is troubled, challenged. We have a good health system, better, more expensive than any other in the world. Is transparency.
Oh, we lost Phil again. I'm sorry, folks. This seems to happen every now and then. We have a few days. Can't tell why. Can't tell where. God bless the internet.
What they will do a procedure for.
Phil, we lost you. We lost you a little bit. If you can go back, we lost the signal for a little bit. Go back, if you will, to the beginning so we can get the full text of what you're trying to portray.
We have a good healthcare system. It is far too expensive. And yet, doctors are struggling themselves because of high interest student loans. We have too many administrators. We have too many insurers, too many people working in the insurance. I believe we can skin it down some by applying free market transparency. I want to offer organizations the opportunity to negotiate health care for their members. I want insurers to post on their website what they will pay for a procedure. I want doctors, hospitals, and pharmacists to post on their website what they will do a procedure for, how much they will charge for a medication. And then I want the consumer to be able to look at all of them, have a choice between a organization that he might belong to, between his work, between Obamacare, between whatever. Let him decide what insurance is best for him. Let him decide what care he needs, what level of care, and how much he wants to pay for it.
Transparency being the primary motivation of having a free market. Because there is always the cash option, isn't there? I mean, there's the often ignored, what do I have to do if I just want to stroke a check, as they say, where I come from? Interestingly enough, and I've kind of told the story once or twice this week as I've engaged with a variety of candidates. One of the not discussed impacts of having a border with Mexico is the high degree of border traffic that leaves from the United States to Mexico for often elective surgeries and cosmetic surgeries, where the equivalent of board certified doctors exist in a much freer market and are able to perform those operations, often for cash, as in a check or whatever, for greatly reduced prices with none of the attendant strain on our healthcare system. No deductibles, none of it. Showing that there is, in fact, on a couple of issues we talked about tonight, great advantages to be had by having open, fluid borders where the exchange of people, ideas, and commerce can take place without the heavy hand of government. People can make choices. They can analyze the performance records of doctors there and allow, if you will, the term informed consent be even more powerful. There are so many ways that the government has introduced middlemen into the healthcare business. There are so many stages. Is it possible at this point to flatten, if you will, that model? What's the mechanism by which you incentivize that? How would you get that done?
I believe if we instill in the transparency, that we will get a long way there. I believe that if doctors are able to do a balance transfer to our debt fund for their student loans, for everybody, if 5% simple interest sounds good to them, let them do that balance transfer. And then they will pay our debt while they reduce their debt. And every penny becomes available to loan again. I believe that will help doctors. I do not want to do any mandates, but I want to explore ways that we can have more medical student graduates. Right now, we limit our medical schools to how many they may take at a time. That makes sense to me.
The heavy hand of government again. Licensing. It's astonishing how often, particularly in our response to the COVID-19 crisis, how often the overriding hand of licensing has become obstructive to literally saving lives. It's such a simple concept. States like Arizona, by the way, are exploring reciprocity with all states around the country. I'm sorry, Phil. Our signal has been a little tough tonight, so to the listeners, I apologize for that. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah.
We lost him again. I'm wondering if it's the time of night. Oh, you're back.
I'm back.
All right. Follow through, sir.
I do not know where I left off, Pat. I don't know where you lost.
I think we were talking about licensing, and the effort to increase capacity at medical schools. You were making a point about the limited availability of slots at medical schools.
Pat, I am torn. I do not want to mandate. I will not mandate as a president. But I want to address that and explore that. I don't have an answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair enough. We have an open mic policy here.
I want to make. Okay. I want to make student loans freely available.
Freely, what was that? I'm sorry.
I want to make student loans freely available.
Okay.
5% interest,
mm-hmm.
and they have 4 years to complete their degree or go on to grad school, and then they start paying it back. But they pay it on the basis of a term loan at 5% simple, and they reduce our debt as they do it.
There are folks who will argue that the easy access to student loans, and I guess that depends who you talk to about easy access, Since so many student loans are credit-based. And again, banks should have the freedom to loan money as they see fit. I'm wondering what the impact of that is going to be on post-COVID after all these folks have been on unemployment for so long. That's an aside. The constant presence of student loans that are inexpensive has actually worked to inflate the price of college education, as colleges have raised their rates, in many cases, well in excess of inflation. Do you think that's a possibility as a result of that policy, or how do you think that a market will react, particularly if you had such an explosion in student tuition?
Well, first, I want colleges that accept loans of the sort that I'm talking about. I want them to post on their website the cost of a degree. I also want them to post on their website the first year earnings of the average student who gets that degree. And then I want the student to make the choice. I want to make the money available to the student, but only FAFSA offers $53.50 per semester. That is their offer. That's silly. Let the student borrow only what they need, understanding that they are going to have to start paying it back in 4 years. And I hope they have a degree when they do it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of student loan forgiveness? Of the like that Mr. Sanders
Absolutely
has been.
not.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
We're broke. Every penny of discretionary spending that the federal government has made is borrowed money from our grandchildren, or borrowed money that our grandchildren will be paying interest on. We got to stop that. There is no money in the till. The entire discretionary budget is deficit spending. It's all borrowed money.
For the past few weeks, I've stood in wonder. And I say the few weeks running up to COVID, and seemingly, by the way, we've ceased discussion on this, so it must not be an issue anymore, right? And I mentioned this to another candidate the other night. The notion that we've instituted tariffs on China with the reaction, of course, of loss of trade to American farmers, who have then been gifted with, or it was proposed they be gifted with, funds from the United States government to make up for their loss, which, of course, are funds that we've borrowed from China. Oh, my. Well, got a couple minutes left. In closing, if you will, well, first of all, we engage and we encourage our guests to engage in what we call shameless self-promotion. And first off, give folks an idea where they can find the Feel Great campaign, where you can volunteer, and give an idea of how they can reach out to you, and maybe even donate.
My website is feelgray2020.org. Please reach out with questions, reach out with concerns, reach out with suggestions. We together can take this country back. We need 38 electoral votes to do it. And then we need to position our candidate so that Congress will accept them as a compromise. The delegations will vote by delegation, by state. We need 17 states. There's a half dozen that are hopelessly divided. They will not agree on Donald. They will not agree on Biden. They might agree on us.
Mm-hmm.
There's another 8 states that still have blue tarps from the 2017 hurricanes that FEMA has not been able to help. There's a massive backlog. We can help them. There are all of those states that have been hurt by Donald's tariffs. We can offer them an alternative. We need to reach the suburbs. And we are gifted, we are blessed with libertarian affiliates in virtually all of them. Let those affiliates host meet and greets for our candidate and have our candidate get there, as I have. I have been in those suburbs. I have talked with those people. I have reached out to the disenchanted, the disillusioned, and they like what they hear. We can carry this. We can carry it this year. My name is Phil Gray. You can find me at philgray2020.org.
Wonderful stuff.
And please give me some feedback.
I've been thinking about how to do that. And one of the brainstorms I had today as I was on the road dealing with my Willie Loman thing was to invite everybody back. And one of the things we do here is, and this is a very recent expansion of what used to be just a once a week 3-hour show. But one of the things we do here is talk radio, and in a 21st century sense. You can call a good old telephone number and someone will answer and you have a conversation with them. I mean, everybody gets to listen. Just it's not done on the radio anymore. It's done on the internet. Would you be willing to, if we, if you have an opportunity, maybe start in the next week or so, is just come on for a half hour or 45 minutes and just open up the phone lines to see whoever wants to call. It's an ask me anything, but just without the clumsiness of the computer interface. Would that be something you'd be willing to do?
Absolutely.
All right. I think if the super producer Joel is listening, I think we'll try to organize that. I want to thank you for coming out tonight. You've got provocative ideas. They are certainly not run of the mill, and they invite great conversation, as do all things libertarians seem to be. They invite, if you will, hard debate. But I think we need that. We need the opportunity to flesh out ideas, and we need the opportunity not just to contain ourselves to one favorite approach. The great political movements of our time have been centered around debate and a willingness to have an open mind to issues. And I think that's what your candidacy embodies. So thank you for joining us tonight. Folks, if you stay on the line, we are going to morph into a talk radio segment with some local conversation about COVID from a young entrepreneur. But at the same time, again, a big shout out to the Gray campaign. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. If you like us, follow us, whatever. Subscribe to us on the YouTube. We'd be grateful. It's how indie media works. It's how we find a way to get our thoughts, our ideas, our guests, our issues, our conversations out to our broader base, far beyond the maddening crowd of the white noise that you're so often subject to with the mass media. I don't believe in media conspiracies. I don't believe that media is out to purport or pervert one position or support one position at the cost of others. I don't think they're that smart. I don't think they're that good. It's just a question of having a bigger toehold in the American consciousness. That is clearly changing. So, folks, stay tuned. We're going to morph into our talk radio segment, if you will, and we'll be right back.
Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, buddy. I think we're still on a live mic. So I'm going to ask, that's the beauty of indie media. We're still tightening up some of these ends.
I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
No, it's we can't accept. We're still live, probably, but if people hear this, I don't think it's a problem. We can't just accept one set of ideas, one approach, one. I mean, if you went to a restaurant, sorry, think about those days. Back in the day, we can tell our grandchildren when we went to restaurants, people prepared us food, and we selected it from vast choices on multi-page, handwritten or typed pieces of what was called at the time paper. And we were able to customize those food and customize those selections based on a whim we might have at that very moment or something unique that was offered to us back when we went out to restaurants. Well, the same thing is a political thought. I mean, if sometimes the Libertarian Party, you feel like when we were all in college and we had those extended bull sessions in our dorms or fraternities or sororities late at night about this or that. That's the beauty of being libertarian because, quite frankly, most of the folks in the movement are very thoughtful. And while they certainly have their own favorite economists, they certainly have their own favorite approaches. By and large, sometimes with a beer or in my case, a root beer, folks will be open to conversation about that. And as opposed to, we exist in a political party where the platform and ideas matter. They just do. And the quality of your ideas matter. And we're probably the only political party where if you're an economist, you're a rock star. There aren't many organizations like that anymore who even understand the role of an economist. That whole Russian-Saudi deal, obviously I bring it up every night for God's sake, is a huge red flag to me. And the willingness of Republicans, if you will, to simply say, well, that's now part of the process, when if Mr. Obama had done it just a few short years ago, you would have had insurrection in the streets, tells you how intractable the people's love of laundry, as Jerry Seinfeld once said, as over independent thought. It's terrible. And when I suggested to several the economic issues, and I'm a economic hobbyist. We have people like Tarnell Brown who are in the movement who are, legitimate economists. I'm just someone who kind of sits in the stands and watches. When you get into an economic prescription of how the free market works, you'll always get the response for the populist response for that. Well, it's the jobs. Well, of course it's the jobs, but it's not government's role to guarantee jobs. That's Soviet workers' paradise, isn't it? Yikes. I mean, I'm not sure what to say to I know what to say to progressives. I can debate progressives. I'm not sure what to say to Trumpers anymore. Because it really doesn't matter. They'll have a reason in some form of moral relativism. How do you deal, someone like yourself who's a thinker, with the type of ignorance of fact and moral relativism that's so pervasive in this country now? And I'll just throw that question out to you.
I believe that we can all work together. I can work with anybody. I can find common ground with anybody. Some of the Trumpers cannot accept that he has done anything that was a mistake. And our conversations are short and sometimes brutal because of that.
You're a very
we all
polite
want
person.
A better America.
We do.
I'm sorry?
No, you're a very polite person. Brutal is probably the understatement. You're understated as well. Brutal is being polite. Holy cow. The conversations that I'm party to, or just I'm in the cheap seats watching on social media. The East German gymnastics judges would give, 10s and 11s, if you will, to some of the Trump participants. I'm just saying to my producer, we're just kind of having end of show chit chat. So I'll even note to him, end of show chit chat. But again, they would nominate. Nadia Comaneci had nothing on some of the. A guy like Larry Kudlow, who is, again, regardless of how you feel about his free market economics, prior to it, ran a syndicated radio show for years where he advocated nothing less than an absolute slavishness to free market economic principles. And even he's doing backflips and, or what's that Olympic sport where they wave the flags and do floor gymnastics? Yeah, he's doing that. He's right out of what are those swim movies from the 1940s where they would do like Caddyshack, do the choreographed swimming. He's doing that in order to rationalize Trump. Yikes. Just seeing people sell out like that after they've made a career standing up for issues is just, it's debilitating. More than ever, we need people to take principled stands, even if we disagree with them. Yeah. Just stick to it and argue your point. Don't feel like you need to politicize everything you've done in order to maintain a government job. So, I don't know. We'll take it from there, buddy. But I'm glad you're open to that idea. I'm going to explore that idea about folks just taking regular phone calls. And because I may be one of the first people to try and do a libertarian talk show. A talk radio show style. And it's been met with interesting results. A lot of the young folks who've called in are sort of amazed that they can have an on the air conversation just by dialing a phone. That seems to be different. So, folks, we're going to take a break now. We're going to segue over to talk radio. If you've got a comment that you'd like to make about the prior segment, we're also going to try and bring. Actually, let's see if we can take a minute break and bring our friend Dr. Luis on the phone. So, super producer Joel, if you can bring us down for just a minute and let me know you're out there.